Your microphone has been turned on.
Hi everyone, this is Adam Hops with the National Operations Center of Excellence. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, let a few more folks join us in the meantime. If you would like to look into a little bit of the background about how we started in communications and TSMO at the center, please take a look at that link in the chat box, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks so much.
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
Hi everyone, my name is Adam Hobson. I'm from the National Operations Center of Excellence. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar. It's 2 p.m. Eastern, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're really excited to be covering the topic of communications and TSMO today, especially as it relates to internal communication strategies and helping agencies evolve into the operations mindset. We're really lucky to have Tracy Bramble of Iowa DOT and Tim Tate of Arizona DOT, communications experts for two of our DOTs that I think really lead the industry in their efforts. I encourage you all to follow Iowa and Arizona on Twitter and Facebook to see how they work with the traveling public side. And Iowa's also done some great videos on TSMO and automated vehicles that I know we at the center utilize all the time for our communications efforts. We also, I know I see a lot of you who are joining us today are from state and local DOTs, which is fantastic. And we are looking to always feature your communications efforts and any resources that you've developed, whether that be by posting work that you're doing or doing case studies around some of your efforts of either internal communications or external to the public. So please feel free to let me know or email me. We'd love to work more closely with you on building out, communications resources for the TSMO community. We focus a lot obviously on the operators and the engineering side and the TSMO strategy side, but we'd love to start working more and more with communications, so please be sure to follow up with me to keep working on that. The webinar is going to be recorded for you to share with your colleagues, so look for it on our YouTube page and website in the next few days, and we'll also post the presentations. We're going to take a few questions at the end, so please feel free to use the chat box to ask questions of our presenters, and we'll moderate anything that's there at the end. I know going through their presentations, I'm going to have a few myself, so please be sure to put those in as you think of them, and we will get to them to the end. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Tracy here and turn it over to her to start. Tracy Bramble of Iowa DOT, and then we'll hear from Tim Tate after Tracy. Thanks so much, Tracy.
Great, thanks, Adam. Again, this is Tracy Bramble from the Iowa DOT. I'm an information specialist in our Office of Strategic Communications. And I also serve on our steering committee for TSMO and the lead on our training and communications subcommittee. So at Iowa DOT, we asked this initial question. What is TSMO? Is it really a thing, or is it something we do? Is it a noun, or is it a verb? And our response is, in Iowa, it's what we do. So while our director, Mark Lowe, introduced TSMO using the acronym, he made it clear that TSMO is what we do. TSMO isn't just a fly-by-night kind of idea. So we decided, and it was actually at the peer exchange with NOCO last year, that we came to this epiphany to quit calling it TSMO and call it what it really is, a focus on operations as a foundation for everything we do. It is safety, it is mobility, and that's really the function that we need to provide overarching over everything. So whose job is TSMO? We do have an operations office. They take care of the wonderful things like ITS infrastructure and the traveler information pieces and the things we think about every day. But we're trying to get here at Iowa DOT a culture change and a shift from that construction mindset to an operations mindset. And we decided that needed to be framed as something more than just another flavor of the month acronym that if we forget about it long enough, it'll just go away. So in Iowa, we see TSMO as a fundamental shift in culture. And we're trying to get everyone to understand that they have specific responsibilities related to safe mobility. So operations is everyone's job. That's one of our key messages. Whatever the core function is that you work in, across the whole agency, from planning to IT to licensing to maintenance, or whatever cross-cutting activity you have, everything relates to operations in one way or another. But we came to that realization, these realizations for culture change. It can't be carried out by champions. Champions come and go. And to get a true culture change, every part of the agency has to understand the basic concepts that we're talking about. And then it has to be a foundation of how we do business going forward. So here's where we started. Back in 2016, developed our strategic plan, our program plan, and launched our website, which we did call TSMO because at the time we thought that was the thing to do. Then in February, we launched our steering committee, which is a 20-ish member group that I'll get into a little bit more later. And then out of that came subcommittees, the Communications and Training Subcommittee being one of those. So in launching our Communications and Training Subcommittee, first question is, what are we going to talk about? We have our strategic plan, we have our program plan, and we had our start of our service layer plans, of which we were going to have 8 eventually. So the strategic plan is awesome. It's got vision, mission, goals, strategic objectives, everything a strategic plan should have. The program plan's got a little more meaty, going into processes, procedures, vision, and goals. But they were vital, but they should have had a warning label. They were not very exciting to talk about. In communications, you have to try to find that niche, that hook that's going to make whatever you're communicating interesting. So we got a little bit deeper into our service layer plans because those are tactical and practical. They're things that people can dig their teeth into. So all of our service layer plans have these kind of 4 basic elements: opportunities and challenges, description of existing services, existing conditions, and then the gap analysis, what's missing and how can we fill that. So those plans still, they were exciting, a little bit more anyway than the strategic plan and the program plan, but they still don't get to that burning question, why should I care? Why should all of our employees give a rip about a program plan, a strategic plan, or a service layer plan on something like work zones when they don't have anything to do with work zones? So that's where our steering committee comes in handy. Those are the thinkers, this 20-member group, and we made them up of leaders, but we're trying to get away from just choosing those people who have leadership titles and going for the people who actually have leadership capabilities and are actually leading, not necessarily just by job title. And having those 20 people in a room, and initially we were meeting monthly and now we've gone to quarterly, provides a whole lot of opinions for things going forward. So here's what our steering committee does. The annual accomplishment year plan, I'll talk about in a little bit, outlines the 20 top functions that they want to accomplish that year. They also prioritize the training, set policies and procedures, and most importantly, establish the subcommittees who actually get the work done. The subcommittees are the doers, And here's a novel idea. If you have a communications subcommittee, which you should, get your communications staff on that subcommittee. And we decided to keep our subcommittees really small. They're about 3 or 4 people on each, and that helps a lot of the analysis paralysis go away and gets actual results. So in our subcommittee on communications and training, what do we do first? Do we go outside? Do we go inside? And our philosophy is to preach to the choir first. We want to make sure all of our employees get it before we start talking to our outside partners, our RPAs, MPOs, and those types of folks. So getting back to the question of why should I care? For all of our communications, we're focusing on that question. But it's not enough to just focus on that. We need to include at least one of the strategic goals or objectives in every communications effort. So we'll go after safety, reliability, efficiency, convenience, coordination, and integration. At least one of those objectives needs to be in every communications effort. So do we start on the top, go top down, or start bottom up? So we decided to do both. We're very blessed in Iowa because management has been driving the TSMO change for several years now, and our director writes a monthly report that is very heavily read by employees. We also have a very strong internal blog post, and staff involvement in our service layer plans helped us get some of that messaging across. So the top down, in September of last year, Mark Lowe, our director, put this out in his director's report. He threw in the FHWA definition of TSMO, but it didn't really resonate, so he came up with his own, and this is Mark's definition of TSMO. TSMO is a concerted and proactive effort to operate the system at its highest and best capacity. It rests on a framework formed by the intersection of road weather management, traffic control, traffic incident management, and work zone management, and touches almost everything we do, from design to field maintenance to how we clear crashes and obstructions, and how we help stranded motorists. TSMO is an essential part of delivering safe mobility, and when done well, it reduces crashes and increases flow and capacity without adding miles of lanes. So that helps people kind of understand in a non-technical term what TSMO means for our agency. So going bottom up, we have a blog, transportationmatters.iowdot.gov, and we've done several different smaller blog posts. The first one, an overview of what it means to focus on operations, and then getting more into some service layer plan work with intelligent work zones, traffic incident management, virtual way, and autonomous vehicles. Our upcoming posts, and it may end up being a series. I'm in the middle of writing it now, so I'm not exactly sure how it's going to all play out, but we're going to follow a bridge hit from start to finish, and how that process has the potential to touch nearly every business unit in the organization. And that'll give people a flavor of how they fit in the big picture of operations. And because we have websites, and they need love too, this is our website if you want to check it out, iowdot.gov/TSMO. It does have the video on it that Adam was talking about, if you want to check that out. And another shout out, I mentioned a little bit earlier about the accomplishment year plans. This is what the steering committee puts together every year. We're on our 4th one right now. Those 20 goals to be accomplished. And another communications effort that I really want to dig a little deeper into is promoting these wins a lot more diligently than we have in the past, especially internally. And as we start to go external a little bit, we've actually changed our branding to follow our focus. As you'll notice on the top line, the Iowa DOT Smarter, Simpler, Customer Driven was our tagline for the last 4 years. Starting this year, and we're doing a little soft rollout for it now, it's not on everything yet, but it's getting there, is the Getting You There as our tagline. So not only are we starting, we're kind of walking the walk as we're talking the talk, trying to get our branding in line with what our focus actually is. Now I want to talk just a little bit about training, because for us, training and communication go hand in hand. We want to provide a framework for sustained operations training within the agency for all employees. That plan builds on the best practices and starts to build an organizational culture. So it talks initially about what is an operations focus and what does having an operations focus mean to daily job functions. This is going to be tough for you to read, but it's just our matrix of training. And right now where we're sitting is the first level. Our new employee orientation will launch this month. It's about a 7-minute video. We don't like to do videos, but that's kind of the way our new employee orientation works. So it's a 7-minute orientation to operations, very, very high-level overview of operations. And then the next step, which we are just starting to work on, will be Operations 101, and that's for people who don't touch operations directly every day, but they play a role, like right-of-way, driver and identification services, contracts, those people who all have a piece, but it's not a direct operations piece. Our Operations 201 is going to be an advanced class that, and these are not successive. You just need one level depending on what your job function is. And then the 301 is kind of our dream. We have land purchased for a TIM training facility, and we would love to be able to provide an Iowa-specific mini operations academy. So the common elements are going to be interactive, either Skype or in person. We don't want to do these on video or webinar. We want to be able to see people's reactions and interactions, and they're geared toward a group's function within the agency rather than a job class. Our challenge that we're finding out is how to make that video venue or in-person training sustainable with new employees entering the workforce and current employees transferring. I think we're going to be pretty good at getting everybody through that first time, but then how do we keep it up and sustain it over time? And that is what I have.
Tracy, thank you so much.
You bet.
Fantastic. For those who have questions for Tracy, please feel free to put those in the chat box there, and we'll return to them after Tim's presentation. I put up a few of the links that Tracy mentioned there, so please view those as well. So we'll turn it over now to Tim Tate to hear about Arizona DOT's efforts along the same lines of instituting TSMO within their organization. I'll switch over to Tim's presentation now.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to say good morning because it's still late morning here in Phoenix, but good afternoon to those of you who are beyond Phoenix. So I'm going to make a really funny, well, at least I think it's funny, a really funny comparison or kind of connection. We are having a huge day here in Phoenix because Taylor Swift is kicking off her new stadium tour right here in Phoenix with a big show tonight at University of Phoenix Stadium where the Arizona Cardinals play. And Arizona has sort of developed a reputation over the last few years of having creative safety messages on our overhead message boards throughout the state, and today is no exception to that. We don't put them on a schedule. We try to put them based on events and activities that are occurring around the state. So we have Taylor Swift messages today, and they're getting a huge reaction on social media and traditional media, and they tie back to core safety topics. Now, the reason I mention that is because it's a good example of how we've integrated TSMO across the agency. The communications division actually works up those messages and schedules them, but it's the TSMO folks, of course, who maintain the boards, who program the boards, and who schedule those in tempo with other messages that need to be there, not just the messages that we kind of like to be there. So Taylor Swift, so you can think about Taylor Swift as you think about this presentation and how Taylor Swift connects to TSMO. At least in Arizona, tonight she does. So I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about how we've launched TSMO here in Arizona and tried to really integrate it as part of the agency, not just as a function of the agency, but sort of as a change in structure of how we operate, not just what we do. All right. Oh, look at that. I can change the slide. Thanks for your help, Adam. So before TSMO, as I'm sure many of you know, things were really scattered here in Arizona. The Traffic Operations Center, for instance, which is our hub for statewide operations, was combined with ITS project management, and it was under the operations section within the state engineer's office. Traffic safety and records was combined with traffic engineering, and that was under the development group. Regional traffic engineers and traffic maintenance were under the maintenance section. Under development, we had statewide traffic maintenance, so it's signage, striping, signal coordination. So things were very much not unified. There were pieces of TSMO that were being performed, but they were sort of being performed all over the place, not in a unified, consistent manner. So we wanted to change that. And so we sort of rolled out the TSMO division by creating a vision and a mission for this new team and outlined their strategies. We wanted to outline the strategy specifically for the purposes of really communicating it clearly internally what this new team was going to be working on. And not that they were solely responsible for these things, but that they were going to be taking a lead role in making these things happen. Now, again, with the integrated principle that we follow here in Arizona, a lot of the things on this list are things that TSMO works on with others in the agency. For instance, traveler information is something that the communications division works on very closely with TSMO. And you'll see transit management on the list is something that TSMO works very closely on with the multimodal planning division and the transit specialists in that group. So again, really following closely with the integration and how do these functions really cross-cut the silos in the agency and tie things together. One of the other ways we did this is through a website. It's tim.az.gov that really pulls in all of our traffic incident management courses, training material, both for the public and for first responders, tow drivers, anybody who might be on the side of the road, frankly, to provide resources to those folks. Now, it might seem odd that we also provided material there for the general public, but we continue to talk about TIM principles, which of course closely align with TSMO, as a way of sort of getting people into the so what aspect of TSMO. And I'll talk more in a few minutes here about so what and why that's so important. So here is the obligatory organizational chart for the TSMO division. It's led by a division director who actually holds the rank of an assistant director of the agency and is supported by a deputy state engineer, and you can see how it breaks down from there in the various groups and teams that all report up to the division director, who then reports to the state engineer. We tried to really organize TSMO in a way that made logical sense and provided as much support for a big state as possible with limited resources, of course. Arizona is a big state, and TSMO has an interesting challenge in that Arizona basically has two major metropolitan areas. There's the Metro Phoenix area, and then there's metropolitan Tucson, which is considerably smaller. Those are the two areas where we have most of the ITS infrastructure, most of the coordinated signals. Now, that's not to say it's exclusive to those two areas, but they have two areas, but then a whole big state where there's all kinds of other challenges that TSMO needs to engage. So it's quite the challenge from a staffing and resource standpoint to be able to address issues that can be hours away from Phoenix, for instance. So we rolled out TSMO in 2005 at the annual Leaders Conference. That's where almost 800 ADOT leaders come together and for an annual event where we talk about really what's happening in the agency, what these leaders need to know to take back to their team members to help them understand the agency's direction, initiatives, and our focus for the upcoming year. So Brent Kane is our director of TSMO. Some of you probably know Brent. And he really focused on, at this first meeting where we rolled this out in 2015, he really focused on optimizing the performance of the existing transportation infrastructure, really that acknowledgement that we can't build ourselves out of congestion anymore. Phoenix has been really fortunate in that taxpayers have supported, going back since 1985, a pretty significant expansion of the highway system here in Phoenix, and we have a modern, very robust freeway network here in Phoenix. The problem with that is that we're about maxed out. We've got one greenfield project. There's a couple of new greenfield projects that are coming, but what's in place is pretty much what's going to be in place. So we realized in 2015 that we needed to start finding strategies for how we can optimize what we have without necessarily adding lanes or adding capacity or adding new facilities. We knew that was going to become much more of a limited option, both just functionally because there's not as much room to do that anymore, and sort of from a philosophical standpoint that the public maybe would not be as supportive of a bunch of new facilities moving forward into the future. Brent also focused on preserving capacity, improving safety and reliability of the existing system. That was really important, especially talking about the safety and reliability of the system. When we talk about reliability, we're really thinking there of making sure that people have an expectation of their A to B, that they know how long that trip is going to take. That's always good information to have. It's especially critical, though, for our partners in the freight industry. So we focused really on a lot on safety and reliability. And of course, safety is always a factor. In Arizona so far this year, there's been 341 fatalities on Arizona roads. That's not just highways, but that's all Arizona roads. And we're trying to bring more attention to that. We topped more than 1,000 fatalities in Arizona last year. And of course, those numbers are mirroring the national numbers and are going in the wrong direction. Finally, at this 2015 conference, Brent also touched on the fact that TSMO's mission and vision, the functions, the org chart, and most importantly, next steps for that division and sort of how it was going to grow and sort of emerge as a leading element of what the Arizona Department of Transportation is about. So really what we transitioned from was one division, the Intermodal Transportation Division, and it broke into two pieces. So today we now have the Infrastructure Delivery and Operations Division. Those are the guys who build stuff and keep it in good order. And then there's the TSMO division that focuses on a lot of the other elements. So we took one division and broke it in half and added a division director to support that. So beyond the Leaders Conference, how did we talk about that? Well, first we started with our internal audience. And these graphics just sort of illustrate some of the things that we did. But we talked a lot about, and there's a picture of a smiling Brent Kane. He wrote a column for our employee newsletter that we also posted on our website. We've covered TSMO pretty extensively in our employee newsletter, not so much the fact that they've been created. We tried to focus on what they do to help people understand what TSMO is, why it's important, and how it cross-cuts throughout the agency. And we continue to spotlight TSMO projects and efforts in our internal communication efforts. We always try to start with our internal audience first when we're talking about a change in structure or philosophy or direction. It's really important to start with your internal audience, and I'll talk more about that here in a minute. We also worked on the external audience. That's the people outside the DOT. We did some news releases that focused on TSMO, including a release actually introducing the new division, which isn't something I would ordinarily do as communications director. I would sort of shy away from doing a news release that says, hey, we did a restructure and this is now what we have, because that's really not interesting to people. But what we focused on were the efficiencies in operation and sustaining a reliable transportation system for Arizona. That was the focus of the news release, not the fact that we reorganized, but the fact that we were placing this emphasis in a new area that people could benefit from directly, that we were looking out for them. In Arizona, we have our motto basically is making transportation personal. And we're always looking for ways to drive home the fact that we understand how critical transportation is in the lives of our customers and the people who are driving in and out and around the state of Arizona. And we never want to lose sight of that. So we always try to make messages go back to that point of how do we make transportation personal? So in doing this with the external audience, we've also focused on things that, again, resonate with the public, things like upgrading traffic signals or using a very innovative shield to protect signs from graffiti artists. I use artists there casually. We also talked about a new I-10 dust detection system, which was funded in part through a FastLane grant. And again, providing benefits to people, tying it back to TSMO, but explaining what the benefits are. So really talking about the what over the how we're structured aspect. We also use the ADOT blog to great benefit here in talking about TSMO, and that's a.azdot.gov/blog if you're really interested. But we talked about things like using wireless technology to monitor traffic signals in the town of Maricopa, which is south of Phoenix. The director has written some blog posts about how TSMO principles are driving us closer to the Jetsons age. We had one blog post that was very popular nationwide on trying out a different method of merging. And when you hear that, you probably are thinking exactly what we did. It's the zipper merge, the world-famous zipper merge. So we did a blog post about the zipper merge, not so much what the zipper merge was, but why we were introducing it and how it tied into an operations perspective of helping people, preserving mobility, and doing something in a different way that maybe didn't make sense to drivers on the road, but had really great benefits out on the road. We've also talked a lot about technological advancements in connected and automated vehicles. And of course, Arizona is a significant test bed for automated vehicles with Uber, Waymo, and many other companies here testing. And I'll talk more about that here in just a minute. And that all ties in with, of course, TSMO. With our blog posts, we use those as a platform really to feed content to our social media sites, including Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. On Twitter alone, just for example, we have almost 400,000 followers. So when we push a blog post out, we've got a pretty significant audience, which is a curse and a blessing at the same time. And I say that because, I mean, it's a curse in that we have to be very careful of providing content that resonates with our audience, or else we risk losing our audience, and a blessing because we have this great audience that is interested in what we have to say and is engaged in discussing it with us. It's not a one-way push with us when we're talking to our communities. It's a two-way discussion. We engage with the public on social media, and that allows them to question us, to provide us with tips, hints, and suggestions, and allows us to get deeper knowledge and a little deeper understanding of what's happening around the state. We also used video to talk about some TSMO aspects like the Traffic Operations Center, like our electronic message boards over highways, wrong-way driver technology, which I'll talk more about here in just a minute, and our Traveler Information System, which the Communications Division manages in partnership with TSMO. Sort of TSMO provides the data, and the Communications Division works on making it presentable to the public, because a lot of data doesn't necessarily make for good information, right? So let's talk about some TSMO case studies a little bit. The first is our wrong-way driver detection system in the Metro Phoenix area. This is a TSMO-led effort. It uses a first-in-the-nation thermal detection system. Now, we understand that other states are using other types of detection systems. This is actually a system that uses cameras from FLIR Technologies. So we're using thermal cameras. It's really a system that's designed to not stop wrong-way drivers, and we don't warranty it as a way of stopping wrong-way drivers. What it can do, though, is detect a wrong-way driver much faster, provides much more reliable information to state troopers and local police officers, and it allows us to automatically notify the public when a wrong-way driver has been detected. So we think this is a pretty significant advancement and is a great example of how TSMO really can help people, how technology in the roads can help people. Now, most folks driving down the road don't think about the technology that is surrounding them on their especially urban freeways, at least here in Arizona. So we try to really call out, when those examples exist, what that looks like. And the state engineer, Dallas Hammett, did some columns talking about the wrong-way driver detection system. You can see the graphic there a little bit of how it works. It's multiple cameras, internally illuminated signs, some real innovations here that we're trying to tie together. We've got traffic signals and ramp meters that go to red when a wrong-way driver has been detected to try to hold traffic. Of course, this is a big challenge, and this isn't a challenge that TSMO alone will solve. It requires a lot of coordination with state and local law enforcement and other resources in the field. Now, another area where TSMO really has been at the forefront in Arizona is with autonomous vehicle testing. and this is a copy of the executive order from Arizona Governor Doug Ducey from 2015, that sort of set the framework for how autonomous vehicles were going to be tested in Arizona. Now, we have been described as the Wild West. While we are a western state and it can be wild here, we sort of reject the notion that it's a fully unregulated environment. In fact, it is a regulated environment, and we have a lot of cooperation and coordination with the AV companies. We think that Arizona is an ideal place to test autonomous vehicles because we don't see a need for special permits or licensing. AVs have the same registration requirements, and now they have a requirement to self-certify their technology. And nothing in state law prevents the testing of autonomous vehicles on Arizona roads. Now, that's not to say, again, that it's the Wild West. We have a lot of coordination and collaboration with all of the companies that are testing here. It's just not as prescriptive as it is in some states. And TSMO has been at the forefront of facilitating this. In fact, Brent Kane, the director of the TSMO division, sits on the Self-Driving Vehicle Oversight Committee. Sort of Arizona's welcoming philosophy is why a lot of the leading autonomous vehicle developers like Waymo, GM, Ford, Uber, Intel are testing and conducting trials here in Arizona. But as we know, the technology isn't perfect. You know, several weeks ago, a couple of months ago at this point, there was a fatal pedestrian crash involving an Uber vehicle in Tempe, which is here in Metro Phoenix. And as a result of that, the Arizona Department of Transportation ordered Uber to halt testing of its self-driving vehicles until the technology can be refined and frankly better explained to the state. And of course, the Tempe Police Department and the National Transportation Safety Board continue investigating the fatal incident, and we are supporting those efforts. So it's not perfect, and we understand that. But again, in Arizona, there's been 341 fatalities on the road so far this year. Every fatality is important. Every fatality matters. But we recognize that we need to start looking for ways that move us forward, and we believe that TSMO can be a big part of doing that. Here's another example of TSMO at the forefront, and that's traveler alerts. Things like our app that we use for notifying people of critical incidents around the state that uses geofencing technology, a pretty innovative and very low drag app for users around the state. We talk about our 24-hour traffic operations center, our website, az511.gov, that provides traveler information, the use of overhead message boards, social media. Again, it's all integrated. It's not saying that TSMO is uniquely responsible for all of these things alone. But what we are saying is that these are principles of TSMO that we embrace here in Arizona and that we work together on. Again, just another example. This is something that we've worked really hard on, especially with our rural communities where we've employed additional traffic signal coordination. So this is one of those areas where we've tried to really talk about the so what element. You know, people will see us out there monkeying with their traffic signals, and sometimes we'll get questions from small town papers that are that Main Street is essentially a state highway, and they'll ask us what we're doing. So we try to explain it in terms that provide benefit to the traveling public. We can talk about the technology and how great the technology is, and ultimately that's not what's important to drivers. They want to know how it's going to make their lives better and safer. And so we try to talk about things like traffic signal coordination. And we've seen improvements that are as well as or as good as 48% in some areas based on coordinating traffic signals. But you guys have probably seen benefits that match or exceed that. So here's what it comes down to. Here are some strategies for communicating an organizational change that impacts operations. First, like I said earlier, our first stop is always with our internal audience. You need to enlist your staff as message ambassadors. And by that I mean you need your team members, the people that are in your agency, really to be talking about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why it matters. And your staff can be your most powerful ambassadors. We've done research here in Arizona that shows that some of the most trusted people for getting information from are not public information officers. They're not the bigwigs of the agency like the director. It's the neighbor down the street who works for the agency as a maintenance guy, and that's who people go to for information. It's the engineer that they see at church every week. That's the person they want to go to for information. So enlist a broad cross-section of your staff as ambassadors of the change, the ambassadors of the message. You want to look for examples to frame the change, like I've gone through this morning, today, talking about some of those case studies. Look for ways that you can frame the change in a way that makes sense and that resonates with people in a way that they can understand. Like Tracy said, you've got to identify and understand your audience. You want to reinforce that message internally and externally. It's not enough just to focus on the internal audience and hope that it goes external, or conversely, focus on the external audience and ignore the internal audience. You've got to reinforce that message across the board and really work with people to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why it matters. And that's what gets us to this final point of you've got to explain the so what in terms that the audience will understand. And that's really key here, and kind of goes along with what Tracy said. Tracy put it in terms of why should I care? That's kind of the same thing, the so what. I used to be a newspaper reporter in my early career, and I had some crusty editors, and that's what they would always ask me is you would turn a story in, and they would look at it, and they would say, okay, so what? There's an obligation to explain the so what. Why does it matter? What does it mean? Why is it important? In ways that the audience will understand. Now, that last part is important. It's not about in terms that you will understand. It's in terms that your audience will understand, which means your explanation needs to be flexible. It's always going to be the same core explanation, but it has to have some flexibility to allow the language to change, the examples to change, the technology to change, so that the way that you're delivering the message is altered based on your audience. You have to be audience responsive. So those are some strategies for communicating organizational change, and that has been my presentation on how we've integrated TSMO here in Arizona.
Tim, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I think the first question everybody seems to want to know is how many of those Taylor Swift messages were you involved with, and did you spin off the top of your head?
So Taylor Swift is an interesting story. The Taylor Swift messages actually were pretty good this year. We sent some suggestions in to our director, the director of the agency, and he didn't like all of them. In fact, he came up with his own, which I have to acknowledge is a little funny, because that means that our director is, yes, a Taylor Swift fan. So he came up with Cut Off, Don't Get Bad Blood, Shake It Off, and then Unbuckled, Nightmare Driving in a Daydream. Now, I had to have the music videos to those songs forwarded to me so that I understood what we were telling people. They are good standalone messages. They make sense even if you don't make the Taylor Swift connection. But the director here in Arizona was very proud of himself for coming up with messages that actually made the cut, and of course they would be Taylor Swift messages.
That's fantastic. That's great. We have another question that appeared in the chat box that we'll get to in a second. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to put them in there. We do have about 15 minutes to ask a few questions. I have a few of my own, but we'll go first. Alex Estrella asked, can you, and this it looks like I believe it's for both of you, maybe a third part there is for you, Tim, but can you provide a bit more insight on internal communications training between departments, including procedural implementation process changes, particularly any training or departmental activities across the noted departments and the referenced organization chart, I think that Tim, you had up earlier. The last slide seemed to touch on this, but a little bit more insight would be great. I think this is getting a little bit to like the understanding what other agencies do and how processes might have changed, with the TSMO implementation.
I guess in Iowa, our training is more understanding what operations is. It's not necessarily that what we have done is changing, while it is, because we're obviously, as Tim said, not going to be able to build our way out of congestion. Everything is going to have to, how do we make the system we have operate at its peak capacity? And so that's kind of the change in philosophy that we'll be communicating through every layer of our training. I don't know if that gets to the question, but
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is Tim. Here in Arizona, we're a pretty big agency, and like Iowa, we cover things like driver's license services, vehicle registration and titling. We've got commercial vehicle enforcement. We actually own and operate an airport at the Grand Canyon. So we have a very diverse agency, which means not everybody is a traffic engineer or a highway maintenance worker. So we have to find ways to communicate these things and train staff and sort of cascade the messages down in ways that connect with a diverse cross-section of the staff. And so that's where we've tried to take the same approach we do with the external audience with the internal audience of explaining things like an operations focus or an operations mindset in a way that uses a lot of examples and talks about benefits to drivers, benefits to customers, and enhancing safety. Now, one thing specifically that we've done is we've put a significant focus on traffic incident management training. In Arizona, the DOT here, ADOT, has taken the lead in providing traffic incident management training to first responders around the state, like I said, tow truck drivers, anybody we can think of to help really build upon those principles as sort of a first and foundational step in integrating TSMO across the agency and across the state, frankly.
Yeah, and this is Tracy. We've done the same or very similar in Iowa where our DOT takes that Sharp 2 training out to all of the service providers, and Tim, talking about Tim and keeping things moving if there's an incident, talking about secondary crashes, and just getting all of that information out to those providers as a way to promote TSMO.
Great, thank you. Tracy, I had a question when you were talking about the strategic plan versus service layer plans and how that you kind of, the further down, the more useful those were. How would you approach the development of, or either you and the communication side or the department as a whole, how would you approach the development of these differently after going through the communications aspects of the implementation process?
Of the service layer plans?
Yeah, or of even the strategic plan as a whole.
Well, I think the strategic plan and the program plan both are fairly, I mean, they are what they are and they are what they need to be. They're not going to be the documents that you're going to promote throughout the agency or externally. They're the foundation, and if anybody wants to dig deep into why we do what we do, those documents need to be there as that foundation. But as far as talking about why do I care, or as Tim says, what, so what, that's where those service layer plans come in, because they're the actionable items. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. I mean, you've got to have those foundational documents in the strategic plan and in the program plan, but where you're really getting into the meat and potatoes is in those service layer plans.
Okay. Looks like the illustrious Todd Zimkowski's posting a question in there. Before he posts this question, I'll try to get a few more in. So both of you emphasized starting with your internal audience. I'm curious, what other topics outside of TSMO have you had successes with when it comes to internal communications?
Well, safety obviously is one. We have a behavior-based safety program internally with our folks, and they have to know what PPE they need and what is expected of them when they're on the roadside to prevent an incident, so we don't have to go through TIM training. So that's been one internal set of communications that we've had some success with. Our safety rate is considerably lower over the last 3 years. I think last report I saw was like a 45% reduction in off-duty days due to injury. So that's one of the things we've had some success with.
Great. Tim, any other areas besides safety or TSMO that Arizona's had a lot of success with?
Yeah, you know,
Getting through?
yeah, it's interesting. We've actually tried to turn our entire staff into safety ambassadors. We talk a lot about safety and the driver's role in safety, and that driver behavior is 94% of crashes on roads today. And a lot of people who aren't necessarily in the business don't realize that. They think it's, you know, it's vehicle failure, or it's infrastructure issues, or it's acts of God, or it's wildlife that jumps out in front of you, when in reality 94% of those crashes are people being bad drivers, and that's a hard truth to sometimes acknowledge.
Well, and I think as transportation agencies, I know way back in the day, I've been around the agency almost 30 years, we would never blame a crash on a driver. When we first started our safety management system, and that, you know, there was always some engineering that we could do, or there was something else that we felt we could do, and we just didn't feel comfortable blaming the driver for a crash. And, you know, come to find out, data showing 94% of the crashes are bad decisions, or multiple bad decisions by drivers. So being comfortable communicating that has really been a big change.
Great, thank you. It looks like Todd Zinkowski was making the point to my question about strategic and service layer plans. That he made a good point that consistency of the framework of the service layer plans is real critical as things get rolled up into an annual plan.
As Todd well knows
Yeah.
from all of our service layer plans.
Caleb Winter just asked a question. Do you have examples of how you communicate TSMO internally or externally to freight, transit, and other modal stakeholders? I know this is an issue that we're tackling at NOCO. Tracy or Tim, any thoughts on that?
Well, I know especially during winter weather, that traveler information piece related to freight, like in Iowa, if our road system is not normal winter driving conditions, if we have partially or completely covered roads, oversized loads can't move. And so communicating that information has been critical to our freight haulers. And that's all done through our 511 system and through social media. Our social media, like Tim's, is pretty robust, and we have a lot of a big following. Not quite as big as Arizona, but we're getting there. You know, we're a little bitty state.
You need Taylor Swift to come visit you.
Hey, you know, our top 2 messages were Taylor Swift messages. So
Oh, see, there you go.
just saying.
So
Wow.
in Arizona, you know, most of our focus with the external stakeholders has been with the freight community.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have an international border, we have a lot of freight that comes in from Mexico, a lot of produce. In fact, most of your lettuce and fruit like strawberries come in from Mexico through Arizona. So we focus a lot on the freight movement community, the trucking community, of helping them avoid peak hours, of really helping to coordinate border. There's different rules for how far in a truck from Mexico can go north of the border, weight limits, some of those factors. We've worked very closely with that. We're also getting really engaged in providing additional information to the trucking community on available trucking parking spots as that becomes increasingly an issue. Arizona is also interesting that we're 1 truck day away from the port of Long Beach. So the trucks can pick up a load in Long Beach while their clock is running, make it to Arizona in a day, but we need a place for those trucks to stop before they continue on their journey to the rest of the U.S. Their emphasis, though, is just, frankly, getting out of California because of the congestion and everything else. And it takes them that long to get from Long Beach to Metro Phoenix or somewhere in the surrounding area. So we're really putting a big emphasis on working more closely with the trucking community. In fact, we've got the new I-10 Corridor Coalition, which includes California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, really helping to coordinate those efforts in a way that makes sense for the trucking community. And we're looking sometime here in the near future of actually testing some truck platooning operations.
In Iowa, we're also working regionally with the Truck Parking Coalition to try and figure out how to use technology to identify parking spots, because we kind of have the opposite problem, or maybe similar, but we're being so rural, it could be 30 minutes until you find another place to park your truck that's not a ramp, and we don't want them parked on the ramps. And so getting that technology in cab, not distracting, not interactive necessarily, where the driver has to, function with a device, but will be able to find truck parking before their ELD shuts them down.
Great, thank you. So if there's any more questions, please go ahead and put them in there. I think I'll conclude with my last question, which we heard a lot from both of you about the successes of communicating out to the broader agency and to the external public as well. I'm curious about how things work internally in terms of people communicating to you internally, how you first learn about something like TSMO, at what point are you brought along, how does that work, and then even TSMO strategies like wrong-way driving efforts, or what you just mentioned about freight and those things. At what point are you brought in? How does that evolve internally?
Well, this is Tim here in Arizona. I've got a pretty strong team of public information officers, and they sort of divide the state into regions or beats that they cover. And they stay in pretty close contact with their regional traffic engineers, their district engineers, and other folks to find out what's going on. So when we're doing something like installing a dust detection system or a wrong-way driver system or looking at truck platooning or autonomous vehicles, I've got communication staff who are sort of embedded with those teams who can understand what's going on, put it into terms that people will understand, and sometimes most importantly, take little nuggets of information and float those up so that we can connect the dots. Sometimes that's the most important part of what the communications group can do, is take information from various project teams and tie those together in a way that creates a bigger, more profound picture for the public, and sometimes for the public and for policymakers and for legislative leaders and others who are being asked to fund some of these things. Your communication staff can really help to tie those pieces together, or at least make the connections that allow a little bit more of a strategic viewpoint to be placed on what's happening. Sometimes it's easy to get a lot of efforts fragmented, but communicators sometimes can help tie those together.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Tim said, and I'm a little bit jealous of his structure, because we have a central communications office, and then luckily a lot of us have been around a while, and so we know a lot of people, and so when we kind of get an inkling that something's going on, that's when we start digging into it. But Tim's absolutely correct that connecting those dots through your communications folks for a bigger, more strategic picture of what's going on instead of just a one-off project here and there is really important.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, this has been extremely informative. Thank you, Tracy and Tim, for your time and sharing all your success with us. For those who have colleagues who should see this and hear more, we will send out that recording and slides here in the upcoming week. So please look out for that. And again, my what I said at the beginning about wanting to share your successes in your state and local agencies around communicating TSMO and operations, or even specific strategies or practices, please reach out to me and let me know. We'd love to share more about what everybody else is doing around the country. So thank you again to Tracy and Tim, and we'll talk to all of you soon. Have a great day.